I am Jim Collison, live from Omaha, Nebraska, in the Gallup office in Singapore. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, Southeast Asia edition with special guest Vibhas Ratinjee, recorded on February 10th, 2014. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share their tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals and teams and organizations around the world. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the show, we do have a live chat room available. It's right below the video. Or if you're listening to the recorded version, email them to us after the show. Just send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. And don't forget to visit the Gallup Strength Center. Very, very easy to get there. Just gallupstrengthcenter.com for all your coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video, and actually an explosive video, as you see my light turn off and turn back on. You can catch the video in both streaming, downloadable audio, for offline listening to past shows. All those links are available at coaching.gallup.com. Saurav Atri is our host today. He works as the Director of Talent Sourcing with Gallup in Singapore. Saurav, it's great to see you today. Welcome to a cold Nebraska, and we're glad you're warm in Singapore.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening to you, and good morning and good afternoon to people who are dialed in live from around the world. We welcome our viewers back online on our Call to Coach Southeast Asia edition, and this is post the Chinese New Year celebration, so we are happy to be back. We continue to bring access to our experts and strengths through this forum and hear from their experiences. This is, again, building into our vision of having 1 billion people access their strengths and to have those 1 million coaches to help them through this journey of investing in them. We are, as all of our coaches already know here in the Singapore region and worldwide, we are committed to helping our coaches build all their skills and knowledge and to be our partners in this strengths movement. Today, we are privileged to have Vibhas Ratinjee, who with us, on the Call to Coach Southeast Asia edition. Vibhas is a senior practice expert with Gallup, based here in the Singapore office. He's also a lead consultant to some of the Gallup's top clients in Asia Pacific and the Middle East regions, and is an executive coach and leadership consultant to some of the most influential senior executives and CEOs in the region. He's consulted more than 100 organizations, and his client portfolio spans the financial services industry, telecom, retail, and pharmaceutical. He specializes in executive level coaching, so we'll get to hear a lot of in-depth insights into how he coaches CEOs. And he'll also specialize in engagement and strategies and facilitates Gallup's consulting programs, including strength-based leadership and succession management. So throw your questions at him, whenever you want to know more about those. Since joining Gallup in 2001, he's worked out of our India, Thailand, and Singapore offices. He's also widely published and has been speaking at multiple forums across Asia Pacific. He's a very sought-after speaker here. So let's hear, first of all, welcome Vibhas. Thank you for joining in, and let's hear his journey. So Vibhas, tell us a little bit more about your strengths journey, and starting with your top 5. Thank you.
All right. Well, greetings everyone, wherever you are. A little bit of my journey. So I took the Strengths Finder the first time. I think that was in 2001. I think incidentally that was the year when we published Now Discover Your Strengths, and that was the year when I joined Gallup. So now, it's probably the reason why I did join Gallup, because I read that book, and it was so fascinating, and just discovering my strengths was such a mind-opening experience for me, and I really wanted to join the organization who's created such a tool. Since then, the first 3 years of my career with Gallup, I hadn't done any strengths or development work, so a lot of my focus was on employee engagement and customer engagement, so those kind of strategies. But as I was working with leaders around employee engagement and customer engagement, one of the things I saw was that you need to really work with leaders at that level, where you're actually trying to understand what their priorities are, how they want to drive customer engagement, how they want to drive employee engagement. And I saw strengths to be such a great fit. So I increasingly started incorporating a focus on strengths in all the work I was doing. It was really very, very successful, because not only are we focusing the leaders on what they need to do, whether they're business outcomes or they're driving employee engagement and customer engagement, but you're doing that from a place of great self-awareness. They're trying to understand who they are. Most importantly, trying to get a really good understanding of what the executive team looks like. So a lot of the work I've been doing since then has been, of course, executive coaching. So I do a lot of work around working with CEOs, but I do a lot of work with executive teams as well. So team coaching, if you may, or executive team coaching. I think that's an area I think which has a lot of opportunity for coaches as well around the world. I think there was recently there was a Stanford study that said that it was a Stanford study of CEOs where they said the findings were that about 2 in 3 CEOs around the world say that they don't have any coaching of any kind, of any sort at all. And about 100% want some kind of coaching. So I think that's always been a focus for me, to actually work with executive teams and to work with CEOs. Partly on strengths, of course. Strengths is a really good tool and a really good enabler. But of course, at the end of the day, it's more than self-awareness, to guide self-awareness, but it's also about ensuring that these executive teams and the CEOs are able to direct that understanding and the awareness towards business outcomes and challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. So I've been incorporating that understanding from a team strategy perspective, from an executive effectiveness perspective, from a team effectiveness perspective, and also I think it's a fantastic tool for succession management and leadership development, especially for high potential leaders. So that's really been a big focus for me. And just starting leaders on a journey of self-discovery itself is very, very inspiring. It not only has an impact on the leader, it has an impact on the entire organization. So the kind of work you do when you're working with leaders on strengths has far-reaching implications. You're really helping the organization when you're working with leaders.
Great, thank you, Vibhas. Also, just you talked about working with senior executives and coaching them. Share how is it different from coaching managers, and what sort of techniques do you apply, which is different when you're coaching senior executives?
Well, I do think there's a difference because, for one, the kind of challenges that leaders face are very, very different. I mean, really the spotlight's on them as far as the organization is concerned. So also from a challenge perspective, and in this complex economy that we see ourselves in Asia, there are a lot of priorities that they need to focus on. There are a lot of competing priorities as well. I mean, there are a lot of silos that exist in executive teams. So from a leadership perspective, it's very important for you to link self-awareness to outcomes, to be able to help them make sense of the kind of challenges they're facing. So, I mean, I don't really call it coaching as much. I call it facilitated sense making, because at the end of the day, what you really need to do is ensure that the leader is able to make sense of the kind of information he's getting and the kind of input he's getting. On the average, if you really look at leaders in Asia, I'd say the average age would be about 50 to 55 years. So they've had enough experience in their time. What you're really trying to do as an executive coach is to try to help them make sense of the experience they've had. And then you can't look at the leader in isolation, because the leader is part of a larger ecosystem that he needs to work in. So that's very, very important, to actually start working and connecting strengths and the discovery and the inspiration they're getting from their strengths to what they need to do to influence stakeholders, whether it is their own teams, so peers, for instance, or it is the organization or their customers and so on and so forth. This is what I found extremely important and when we work with executive teams, especially doing executive coaching. And it's been my kind of observation. I'm seeing increasingly that when companies ask for executive coaching, they expect it to be fairly remedial in nature. I mean, it's usually the troubled executive who gets pulled into coaching because you need to fix them. And I think that's the kind of fix-it mentality that I kind of come across. That's a big challenge. But the important realization is that you can't hire a coach to fix an individual. It's difficult to change behaviors. So that's been a big challenge overall. So working with the individual to ensure that you understand, first, building that level of trust is incredibly important to start with. So build that level of trust with that leader is exceptionally important. What I tend to do is, again, like I said, not see the leader in isolation. I tend to do a lot of pre-work before I get in and start talking to leaders, and that's extremely important. So I insist that I actually have conversations with some of his peers. So I have conversations with some of their team leaders to get a really good understanding of where the situation, where the CEO or where the executive is, and what kind of challenges they face. That's going to be very, very important. The other, you've got to be extremely goal-oriented when you work with a leader, because at the end of the day, the success of an executive coaching program is measured in an ROI in ROI terms. So it's very important to have that kind of understanding of what kind of goals you're working on together. So I usually start with a coaching contract between me and the senior leader, where you need to pretty much outline what you're going to be working on. One framework that's been exceptionally useful, I think we've used it at Gallup quite a bit, is when you start exploring coaching from an outcome perspective, where you say, well, let's talk about leader to self, let's talk about leader to team, let's talk about leader to organization, and let's talk about leader to marketplace. Now, this gives a fairly structured approach of understanding how whatever you're discovering during your coaching process and the actions you're taking are directed towards the right kind of outcomes. Now, I'd say, I mean, of course, you're working with individuals, so at that level, there really is no difference between coaching an individual and coaching a leader. I do think that the set of complications and challenges that leaders face are quite different. Now, from a team perspective, it's it's far more challenging, because when you look at an executive team, what I've seen, interestingly, is that a lot of executive teams actually look alike. I don't mean physically, but they look alike from a talent perspective, because it's a well-known truth that leaders tend to surround themselves with people who are just exactly like them. In fact, I was doing a team coaching session with a client in Mumbai. It was about, I think, 4 or 5 months ago. What was very interesting is when I looked at their team profile, and what we do at Gallup is, of course, we put all the team strengths together on one piece of paper. We call it a team grid, and have that conversation. And they were exactly alike. Actually, they almost looked alike. No, they didn't look alike, but it was almost by some kind of osmosis, they just became one. One of the questions I asked them was, what happens when somebody comes in who's completely different from you? And everybody agreed that that person will get a very, very tough time. So that level of diversity doesn't exist. So that's one thing, and specifically in Asia, I've seen that. I mean, we call it self-replication. So, if I see somebody successful, I really measure my level of success and what made me successful, and I use that as a yardstick of judging and selecting other leaders like me. So that's been one big challenge, and that's the difference here when you're working with leaders. The other is the force of personality. I mean, you're working with CEOs who've been in the business, who've climbed up the corporate ladder, and they spent 20 to 25 to 30 years getting to where they are. And when you start having a conversation to them and giving them feedback, that feedback better be connected to something tangible. That feedback better be connected to something that they can use to further their business. So that's an important challenge. So a lot of preparation. You need a lot of preparation. I spend upwards of 2 to 3 days just understanding the business. I think that's also a key requirement, and if coaches listening to this, business acumen is incredibly important. And you, as a coach, you see that as a competency, as a basic competency that you require. You need to understand the business of the client. You need to understand, I'm not saying you go in there and start using business jargon and the language. That's not important, but you need to understand, in very blunt terms, how does the company make money? How does this leader actually create outcomes? So a lot of research goes into that before getting in and having a conversation with a leader on an executive team. A lot of conversation, a lot of understanding, a lot of secondary research actually is incredibly important before you go in. So when you sit there in front of a CEO, the first conversation, you're well informed about what the challenges are for the CEO and how he approaches performance, how he approaches people, and creating impact.
Excellent. Also, just take a deeper dive into the difficult conversations that you have with the CEO, especially when you're giving them feedback. How do you manage those conversations, and what sort of techniques do you use to kind of help them, direct them towards the right direction?
Great, that's a great question, and I have a few examples there I'd like to share with you. But first, in most cases, when Gallup gets called in to do executive coaching, is with CEOs or with senior leaders, it's usually about dealing with conflict. So there is some level of conflict at, either with another individual or with a situation or a business challenge. So the number one priority, or the number one conversation in the first conversation that we have with the CEO, when we ask them to lay out their challenges, I can't get along with the head of marketing, or I can't get along with, there's a conflict there, either there's a competing priority, and so on and so forth. So those are the kind of difficult conversations that you need to work with the CEO on. Now, that's where you need that kind of sense making. You need them to try things out. I'll give you an example. About a year ago, I worked with regional vice president of a very well-known hotel brand. I won't tell you which that hotel chain is, and a GM. What was really interesting was that the GM was told that he told me in a conversation that it was just too difficult to get along with the regional vice president, because that person is very assertive, doesn't listen to him, is very opinionated. Those are the kind of, I mean, in strengths terms, you call them barrier labels, right? That were being posted. And he said that I've been given a lot of advice, and most of the advice is go have a beer with him and sort it out. And I remember this. He said, I've had enough beers, and it's just not working for me. So he asked me what a possibility and what an opportunity might be. So what I recommended to him was actually fairly simplistic. I said, well, rather than focusing on what's not working, focus on what might be an effective relationship between the two of you. So ask this question. What does a great relationship between me and you look like? Now, it might seem very simplistic and easy, but that created the biggest impact in their relationship, because they did have a beer, and they probably have regular beers now. But what really happened was they started talking about what a solution might look like. What's that effective relationship? They were able to actually outline that. Look, so you have one person who is high command, high competition, the other who is high deliberative and high analytical. So they were able to actually have a conversation where they said, well, when it comes to situations that require immediate decisions, I think you should take those decisions because you have all the strengths around that. But those that require a long-term strategic focus, can you let me do that? But that was a really good conversation because, again, it was a very appreciative, solutions-focused conversation. And this is a technique I've used fairly often. And I mean, some of you who are aware of appreciative inquiry, it's highly recommended. It works very well with strengths. I've been a student of appreciative inquiry for many years, and I've actually trained under Diana Whitney, who was one of the co-founders. I've found that to be phenomenal as a complement to StrengthsFinder, where the conversations create positive energy rather than focusing on a root cause analysis of failure. You're actually doing a root cause analysis of success and what that might look like, especially when you're dealing with conflict. Because when you're dealing with conflict, it's very easy to get sidetracked into a blame game, especially at higher levels, at executive levels, because there's a lot of politics, as you might imagine. But this is a really good way of having the right kind of conversations that drive the organization or the team in the positive direction.
Great. And when you kind of expand this to the senior executive team, when you're coaching them as a group, so what sort of interventions work really well for you?
Besides obviously preparing really well, but I must tell you one thing about executive teams. On the surface, an executive team might look like they're the best friends, and there's great relationships and it's fantastic. But I've always seen when you scratch the surface, there's a lot going on. So there's a lot that needs to be brought out for discussion, and in a way that's transparent. But here's one point: executive teams hardly meet for these kinds of conversations, and I've had this experience. They meet for budget planning, they meet for resource planning and the operational plans and the business planning and so on and so forth. They hardly meet for these kind of interactions. And when they do, my God, the floodgates open, because you are in a very positive space. And the way we facilitate these executive interactions is as a facilitator, I'm holding the space, right? So you obviously, this is not for the faint-hearted, because you need to be there and control the space for them on their behalf, with their permission, of course. But it's very important that you control that conversation. And when I'm saying that, you want to avoid opening up the floodgates also, because you want to moderate the kind of conversation you want to have. I can tell you, in any executive team, there are about 20 to 30 competing priorities that are vying for the CEO's attention. There's need for prioritization. So how we've used it from a strengths perspective is to really first have a conversation around business issues and key business issues. And that's where you need to that's where you need that business acumen as a coach or a facilitator, and to moderate the conversation towards maybe 5 or 6 key areas that need focus. Once you've done that, when you open up the strengths perspective, when you start talking about the individual contributors, when you start talking about our team strengths, that becomes a really good template for you to start having conversations around what success might look like on those. So I think, again, my advice would be for those of you as coaches who also do facilitated sessions with teams is, one, prepare really well, two, moderate, really hold the space, because you want leaders to respect you. If they don't respect you, they're not going to listen to you. And you're talking about, again, in Asia, like I said, the average, somebody did this analysis, the average age of CEOs and direct reports in Asia, generally, a lot of them are family business owned as well, so obviously there are a few younger people. On the average is about 50 to 55 years. So you're talking to individuals who are seasoned business executives, so you've got to really be prepared. Have clear goals. Be very, very clear about what you're going to be working on in an executive team sessions. Have conversations with the CEO before you go in for these executive team sessions. But there's one thing I found, probably the most important thing is simplicity. They need that. They deal with enough complexity from a market perspective, from an organizational perspective. What they really want you to do is give them simple, clear ideas, and never undermine the power that a simple idea can provide to your clients. I'll give you another example. This is actually a CEO I'm working with right now, and so he's high self-assurance, high competition. Let me see what else. High achiever. So one of the feedback he gave me in a coaching session was, I'm seen as arrogant. I'm really seen as an arrogant person, and I'm seen as difficult. And he's got a high analytical as well. So, and I know that, and I realize this is kind of a challenge for me. So how do I deal with it? I gave him a very simple idea, which he found very useful. I said, the next time you send out an email, or a letter, or a memo, read it twice. That's all. And when you do that, just reflect on your strengths. Are there any of your strengths that might be in extreme, might be impacting the way you're communicating it? And he started trying that out. And it was amazing, because he saw that people were seeing him differently, for one, because they always saw him as somebody who's not approachable. But importantly, when you looked at some outcomes, things like 360-degree assessment of the leader, those shot up. And when I'm saying shoot up, they went from very low levels to very high levels. It was a very simple idea. So as coaches, I think that's incredibly important. You've got to give your clients basic, simple ideas, but you've got to do that once you've understood the situation. You can go there and give them 10 simple ideas, but there should be the right time and the right place and the right point where you give them that idea. And it works like magic, because then they actually see the impact of that idea in their work. That's one way of ensuring that they keep coming back to you, because they've actually used something that you've given them. So they come back to you as senior executives because they really need feedback. I can't emphasize it more. Our image of an executive is that of a self-assured, confident individual, but they need a lot of help. Like they said, it's pretty lonely at the top. So they need that. So as an executive coach, that's what makes sense, to create that level of bond where they come to you for these ideas, and as a sounding board. So those are things I've seen work really well.
And how do you track progress with these CEOs in terms of their growth on the strengths intervention?
It's very simple. Every coaching assignment I take with CEOs, I start with a coaching contract. And the coaching contract, we clearly define a leader to self, leader to team, leader to organization, and leader to marketplace. And I expect them to actually write down goals, specific goals, write down timelines, and pretty much sign on it. You might think that it's a little bit forward for us to actually come in and say to the CEO to go sign it. I can't tell you how many times I've done this and they've actually reacted and responded positively, because they want it to be clear in their heads. So they actually respond very, very favorably when they're asked for specific goals and specific instances where they can improve. And then you track your progress on that. Now, at Gallup, when we do executive coaching with very senior leaders, it's a relationship. So we don't do, we do a few. So I'm right now coaching not more than 10 CEOs and senior executives. But that's very important, and I have quarterly conversations with them. And every conversation, there's a focused impact or an outcome that you're listening for. The coaching conversation then becomes more something that both of you kind of own. So it's not the parent to child relationship where you're telling them what to do, or it's not the adult to parent relationship. It's more like you're kind of co-owning that space, and it becomes more of a mutual understanding between the coach and the coachee as a senior executive, where you're working with them on business challenges and so on and so forth. The first conversation is, of course, StrengthsFinder, and you kind of go through StrengthsFinder results. We've got other tools we use as well. But that moves very, very fast to conversations around, so what's going on? Where are you seeing the biggest impact? You can bring in strengths and say, well, have you thought about this? Or, you can use a lot of strengths from our toolbox on the accelerated strengths performance coaching. But the conversation has to be about the leader and about the individual, and you've got to adapt to that. You can have a big toolbox of 100 different tools, but not every tool works with every individual. So you've got to make sure that what you're using, the kind of questions you're asking, you adapt them to the individual you're talking to. Somebody who is high on command, for instance, is not going to be looking forward to an exploratory conversation. Somebody who's highly analytical, high intellectual might. Somebody with high connectedness might be very different. So always great idea to actually look at the strengths and then adapt your style to the strengths of the individual.
Great. So Vibhas, we have a lot of coaches logged in live who are very keen on exploring working with senior executives or already are working with senior executives. What advice would you offer them, in terms of helping them develop their coaching business or themselves as coaches?
Yeah, some of the things that I mentioned earlier, I think are important points. I think as coaches, you need to be able to develop that understanding of business. That's incredibly important. So, again, I'm reinforcing that business acumen at a very basic level is incredibly important. Executives want coaches who talk their language, not just the jargon and not just the terms, but really understand the dynamics and the mechanics of their marketplace. That's very, very important. They respect coaches who actually have a fairly good understanding of what's going on in the economy. So as a coach, you need to be on top of the industry that the leader is from. I'm saying you've got to read a lot. You've got to be on top of changes that are shaping the marketplace, for instance, because those are the kind of challenges you want to dive deeper into. And again, I'll re-emphasize something that I said earlier. Coaching contract and simplicity is incredibly important to keep driving the right kind of outcomes, but helping them make sense of it rather than telling them what to do.
Vibhas, we do have a question that relates exactly to that. Let me ask that. So Sandeep asks, does this involve discussing business to market problems specifically when you talk about that? So know their business, yes, but do you dig in and talk about business specific problems with them?
That's why it makes sense to actually segment it into 4 different or 5 different conversations, because in the first conversation you can't expect to cover everything. But when you start actually having structured conversations around each of these areas, so I usually start with self, getting to know you better. So they're getting to know your strengths and so on and so forth. The second one is really focused on the team. The third one, like I said, is marketplace. Now, by the time you get there, yes, you're talking about specific business issues. There's no other way. You need to have a really good understanding of what those business issues might be. That's why when you're working with senior executives and CEOs, you're not just working with the CEO, you're also working with some of the other individuals in the market. So get a really well-rounded understanding of the marketplace. I'm not saying you need to be an expert. It's not easy to be an expert, but be well-informed. Be well-informed and be able to link what's going on with what the leader wants, with the strengths of the leaders, and more so from an opportunity point of view. You're not expected to be technically proficient in the industry. but you are expected to call out market changes, for instance, and then link it to the way the CEO is thinking. I think that's how you will be respected.
And then Martin asked, and this is really relevant to this, are we talking, he asked, is this mentoring or coaching? How do you see the difference in those, and is there a fine line between the two, mentoring and coaching?
I think from a mentoring perspective, there is a fine line, but there's a huge difference between the two as well. Coaching is when you are actually working on a pre-specified goal for development or improvement. So as an individual, I'm not mentoring anyone. I think mentoring is where senior leaders are actually working with those who want to develop skills in a certain area, and that makes a lot of sense. So actually we work with organizations where we teach leaders how to mentor. So that's very, very different. And we've been asking this question in a lot of selection interviews, which is, are you a mentor to someone, and have you been mentored? And it's surprising how few leaders actually say, I've actually been mentored, or I actually currently actively mentor someone. Coaching is different because, again, like I said, it's very specific, it's predefined. That's when it's most effective, and it's a conversation that somebody like me or somebody like an executive coach is having. Mentoring is within the organization, which is also incredibly important, of course. But mentoring has a very strong focus on development, so how this individual is growing and how he's gaining experiential knowledge, and that's something we've seen to be an incredibly important area in Asia specifically. We did a study recently on Asian leaders. So it was a Gallup Asian leadership study. And we went to CEOs and senior executives in 6 power cities, from Mumbai to Shanghai. And we asked CEOs a very simple question: what made you a leader? What was really interesting was, by their own admission, most of them said that it was just by chance. We call this accidental leadership. Which means that, it's either self-directed in a way, or you've just been pushed up the Peter Principle ladder, So mentoring is extremely important. Structured conversation is very important. So one critical question, I guess, is coaching enough? And I'd say no, coaching is not enough, because coaching is one tool that you use, but in an organization you have a clear growth in experiential development. That's also very, very important. Ensuring that these leaders have the right kind of experiences early on in their career is also extremely important. So mentoring has its position, and so does coaching, but it's a combination of different developmental interventions that work the best for development.
Okay, let me do some rapid fire questions from chat here. They've been coming in over the course of the interview, so let me go through these. Joseph Tan, who I had the opportunity to interview just a couple months back, asked, how do you view the relationship between external coaches like us, referring to himself, and internal coaches like yourself?
I think there's a happy medium, definitely, where both can collaborate. We work with organizations, and we're beginning to work with a lot more organizations in the region. I'm saying emerging markets like Malaysia, I think that's where Joseph is from, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, where we desperately need actually coaches with local language capability. We go in with, as Gallup, we go in organizations when we do leadership development work and succession management work with 2 to 3 year long-term programs, where we are sometimes developing more than 100 to 200 leaders, high potential leaders and executive leaders and so on and so forth. I think that would work really well, because you've got the language capability, and at the same time you have the comfort of numbers, really, to ensure that you have enough of a force to actually be able to deliver large-scale change programs.
Yeah, just have one question from my side, Jim. So Vibhas, when you're having the initial conversation, because you've said that not all leaders feel that they need coaching, right? How would you position it, telling them that, how would coaching benefit them as a leader in the initial conversation? Because a lot of coaches want to explore that kind of question.
Right. Now, that's a difficult one to do. It's like I said, at least in my experience, I won't say a majority, but a large proportion of leaders are pushed or pressured into coaching by their bosses, and it's true, because either they're a troubled executive or and so on and so forth. So the first conversation is a rough one, and where there's an opportunity to really build the right kind of trust. So you don't want to go all in the first conversation and try to push this individual. You've got to create the right kind of rapport. You've got to give them a few ideas, but you've got to really spend a lot of time building that relationship and the degree of trust. Here's another one: confidentiality. Incredibly important. Sometimes when I work with executives, I'm working with the C-suite, for instance, and like I said, organizations are rife with silos and the lack of collaboration. And each of them have competing priorities. They work really well in most cases, high relators and high executors. But to be able to ensure that each of the conversations you're having are extremely confidential, what I tend to do is all the conversations I have, I compartmentalize them in my brain. In different sections. So whether it's the marketing head, it's the operations head, it's the retail banking head, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it gives me a really good perspective of the organization. But you've got to make sure that the individual understands that whatever you are talking about is not going to be shared. Anyway, obviously, that's a given. That's hygiene. You can't break that trust. But to ensure that this person understands it and opens up. So it takes some time to open up. And what I found really interesting is that in these conversations, StrengthsFinder is the best tool you can get, because the focus is not on why this person has been pushed into coaching. It's knowing what's positive. It's creating that level of positive energy and impetus. It's fantastic. So I've usually not had too much of a trouble with these coaches who've been pressurized into joining a coaching program when you start with strengths. You build your relationship there, and then it goes into, what's interesting is it goes into the personal sphere, because they start talking about challenges they might be facing in their work lives as well. And you've got to make sure that you take those on board, because when you talk about well-being at Gallup, it's the whole mix of everything that impacts a leader, not just the career part of it.
So for executive team coaching, and this is Joseph asked this question, do you do it with the team or without the team, individually with the boss? I mean, or is it always separate from that, from those groups?
So the executive team coaching, we start with individual conversations, and then we actually do a team session. Now, why that's I guess it's important is actually the ideal way of doing it is to have a pre-conversation, a workshop focus where you actually get everybody together for those conversations, and another coaching session right after. And then there are more that follow that. But individual conversations followed up by a group, kind of a collective conversation with everyone, focused around results, of course.
So Sandeep also, as a follow-up question, asked, if strengths-based coaching is different from fixing the problem, in quotes, when do you know when it's over and it does not remain open-ended? How do you define the outcomes in the beginning itself in the contract?
See, the outcomes, like I said, are clearly defined in terms of goals. That's one. But I don't think StrengthsFinder or focusing on the StrengthsFinder is avoiding the problem. I don't think so at all. I'll tell you what, when executives in Asia specifically first look at the StrengthsFinder profile, there are two things they do. The first thing, they look at the top 5, and then they look at the bottom 4, right, immediately. And they're really, executives are really focused on areas that they can improve. I think they're obsessed with weaknesses. Now, I think sometimes we call those bottom 3 or bottom 4 the areas of non-talent. I personally find it I find it a cheesy word, when you're saying it's a non-talent. So are you saying it's a talent or not? What I tend to do is, the question I ask people is when they're looking at the bottom 4, and they will invariably do so, is, are any of them getting in the way of your success? And if they are weaknesses. They are problems. You've got to focus on that. And then you can work on that. So it's, in the strengths world, it's not all about everything's perfect and it's great and it's the strengths. You want to make strengths work for you. You want to make strengths work for your leader, for your client. So you've got to push them a little bit. You've got to challenge them. And if they're talking about weaknesses, don't just say, oh, those are weaknesses. We want to focus on strengths. No, get them on board. Link them to tangible problems that the client might be having, and work with them on that. That's been my approach.
And then one more question from the chat, and this relates more to coaches themselves. Are there some strengths like Maximizer that are more relevant to coaching context than others?
Not at all. I don't think there's a perfect strength for coaching. In my top 10, I have no relationship building themes in my top 5. I have 2 in my top 10, which is relator and individualization. And I think I do okay without relationship building themes, because there's always this preconceived notion that you need that kind of relationship focus to be a coach. The way I coach is very, very different. My coach is more performance oriented. My coaching, my top strength is ideation, so it's focused on what the leader can do. I have maximizer in my top 5, so that's something that I use as well. But it's how you make the best use of your strengths as a coach. That's what we're talking about. You might have empathy, that's great. The way you deal with it is very, very different. It's more important for you to understand what the coachee's strengths are and meet them where they are, rather than thinking about who you are. Now, you need to create your own kind of coaching, I'd guess say a coaching brand. Who are you as a coach? What kind of coach you are? But I wouldn't say any particular strength is more effective than the other for coaching.
Sorry, you're muted there. Sorry, bud.
Yeah, great. So just one final question that I have, Vibhas, for you. Do coaches need coaches?
Do coaches need coaches? I think coaches need different kinds of coaches. I think it's always important as a coach to keep building your repertoire of tools. Keep adding to what you know. Keep adding to how you apply your coaching skills. So from that perspective, there's no end to really learning as a coach. So I'm always in a lookout. I have high input as well. So I'm always in a lookout for new ways of coaching, especially coaching executive leaders. I think I'd say that coaches do need a community of coaches. I wouldn't say that you necessarily need to be a master coach and you're coaching other people, and there are a lot of these master coaches. But I do feel that it's extremely important to have a community of coaches who are sharing experiences and actually swapping tricks of the trade, really, to be able to get better. And this is such a great forum. And in Singapore, I think we've started a meetup group. We're on Facebook, and these initiatives really go a long way. I'd even say that keep adding to your technical proficiency as a coach. There are a lot of certifications that are available for coaching and so on and so forth. Our own accelerated strengths performance coach is a great way to start that. And I think we're going to be adding and enriching it with far more greater tools around how to be an effective coach, how to add team coaching to the whole perspective, and so on and so forth as well. So I think learning as a coach is endless. The journey is endless. And whether you get a master coach, that's great if you're able to get somebody who's fantastic and really proficient in it. But do rely on other coaches and keep learning.
Thank you, Vibhas, and that's what we offer. We have our Accelerated Strengths Coaching course. The next one is scheduled from 3rd till 7th of March in Singapore. The registration deadline for that is 17th of February. You can go on our website, www.gallupstrengthcenter.com, to register for our course straight away. We are also hosting a strengths breakfast session tomorrow in Singapore office from 10 to 12. So absolutely, you're welcome to email me at saurav_atri@gallup.com. And I'll be happy to send you an invitation for that. This is basically helping all the coaches out there to build on their skills, as Vibhas mentioned, adding to that repertoire of coaching technique skills. And also, we have a post-course coaching call with one of our Gallup Strengths experts that helps you kind of discover what is your best coaching style, and helps you focus on your coaching styles to coach other individuals, including senior executives, managers, and teams. So on that note, thank you so much, Vibhas, for joining in, taking time out. We know you're a really busy person traveling around the world, coaching senior executives and teams. Just on that note, thank you so much. Jim, over to you.
You bet. Thanks, Saurav. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available. Saurav just mentioned the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just Gallup Strengths Center, all one word.com. Send us your questions or comments. We have that email address, coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this show and all the past ones over at coaching.gallup.com. We have all the links available for you there. We are looking for guest bloggers for our coaching blog. If you haven't been out to that, it's just coaching.gallup.com. You'll see a theme rolling through all those email addresses and websites as well. And if you're interested in becoming a guest blogger for that, just send us an email and put guest blogger in in the subject line, and we'll get back to you with some requirements on that. We want to thank Vibhas for joining us today, and we look forward to the next Call to Coach. Stay around for the post show, your questions and comments live from chat, and we want to say goodbye, good night, good day, no matter where you're at. Thanks for coming out and joining us today.